Hey, Reddit. My name's Jim. I'm 45 years old. And for a long time, I believed I was living the dream. I've been married to Meg for 20 years that, in my eyes, were built on love, trust, and mutual respect. We met back in high school during junior prom of all places. She wasn't the kind of girl you forget. Her laugh was contagious, and she carried herself with this magnetic confidence. One dance, one conversation, and I was hooked. We stayed together through college, got married soon after graduation, and I thought we had it all. We decided early on that we didn't want kids. Meg was focused on her career in advertising, and I was building my own path in construction. It worked for us. Our life was about experiences, travel, spontaneous date nights, and celebrating each other's wins. She loved the city life, fine dining, art galleries, and expensive wines. I was more of a guy's guy. Golf on the weekends, grilling in the backyard, and watching football with a beer in hand. We complemented each other, or at least that's what I thought. I run my own construction business, and it's been good to me. Building homes, managing projects, it's the kind of work that gives you a sense of accomplishment. Meg used to tell me how proud she was of what I'd achieved, and I loved being able to give her the life she wanted. Nice vacations, a beautiful house, and a couple of luxury items she had her eye on. I worked hard because I thought we were working toward the same future. I thought we had the same goals. But looking back, maybe I missed the warning signs. In the early days, Meg would text me randomly throughout the day just to say she loved me. We'd go on weekend getaways and share everything. Our dreams, our fears, our future plans. But in the past few years, things began to change. It wasn't sudden, it was subtle. Little things. She'd stop texting as often, or forget the small inside jokes we used to share. I brushed it off. I told myself it was normal, that it was just the stress from her job. Her job, by the way, kept her busier than ever. She was constantly flying out of town for client meetings, working late at the office, or going to fancy networking events. I didn't mind it much. I thought this is what successful people do. They work hard. I was proud of her, and I trusted her. I never questioned those late meetings or the business trips. It's not that I was naive. Okay, maybe I was. But I just didn't see any reason not to trust her. After all, we'd been through so much together. 20 years isn't something you throw away for no reason, right? But then came the distance. Physical and emotional. She started sleeping on her side of the bed, facing away from me. The kisses goodbye became quick pecks instead of lingering moments. The late-night conversations, the pillow talk, the intimacy. It all began to fade. I knew something was wrong, but every time I tried to bring it up, she'd brush me off. It's just work, she'd say. Or, I'm exhausted. Can we talk about it later? But later never came. I started spending more time alone, working late, golfing, fixing up the house, just trying to stay busy. I wanted to believe that if I gave her space, things would go back to the way they used to be. But they didn't. And that gnawing feeling in my gut, the one I kept pushing down, it only got worse. I remember this one night a few weeks ago when we went out to dinner. It was supposed to be a date night, but she was glued to her phone the entire time. When I asked her who she was texting, she gave me a weird look, like I'd crossed a line by even asking. It's work, Jim, she said flatly. You know how it is. Except I didn't know. Not anymore. That's when it hit me. This woman sitting across from me wasn't the same woman I'd married. Or maybe she was, and I'd just been blind to it for all these years. I started questioning everything. The long business trips, the late nights at the office, the way she always seemed distracted lately. Was it really just work? Or was there something else going on? I tried to shake the thoughts away. I told myself I was being paranoid, that 20 years of trust couldn't just disappear overnight. But that nagging feeling kept growing. And then the moment came, the one that turned my entire world upside down. It was an ordinary Thursday afternoon. I had finished work early, and on my way home, I spotted Meg's car in the parking lot of a fancy hotel downtown. I knew she had a meeting that day, but something didn't sit right with me. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but instead of driving home, I pulled into the lot and parked next to her car. I sat there for a moment trying to convince myself that everything was fine. But the longer I stared at that hotel entrance, the more my gut told me otherwise. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone. I told myself if she's in there for work, this is no big deal. I'll walk in, say hi, and everything will be fine. But deep down, I knew things weren't fine. I got out of my truck and made my way into the lobby. At first, I didn't see her. Just a crowd of business people milling about, holding folders and laptops. For a second, I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe she really was in a meeting somewhere upstairs. But then I saw her. She was sitting in the corner of the lobby, laughing, really laughing, like she hadn't in years. And she wasn't alone. Some guy was sitting beneath her, and Meg was sitting right on his lap. His hands rested comfortably on her thighs, and her arms were draped around his shoulders like they belonged there. I stood frozen, every emotion I tried to suppress over the past few months crashing down all at once. Anger, betrayal, confusion, heartbreak, all of it swirling in my mind. But I didn't rush over. I didn't make a scene. I knew I had to stay calm, at least for now. If I wanted this to end on my terms, I needed to play it smart. I pulled out my phone and called her. She glanced at the screen, her smile vanishing as she saw my name. After a second's hesitation, she answered, her voice professional, detached. Hey Jim, I'm at a meeting right now. I can't talk. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. Oh, I understand, I replied. But do me a favor, Meg. Look to your left. Her face went pale in an instant. Slowly, she turned her head, and then our eyes met across the lobby. And that's when I knew everything was about to change forever. For a moment, everything froze. The noise of the hotel lobby seemed to disappear as Meg and I locked eyes. I could see the panic washing over her face, the way her hands trembled slightly as she kept the phone to her ear. The man beneath her, a stranger with smug confidence, raised an eyebrow, clearly confused by her sudden change in expression. Jim, Meg's voice was faint, struggling to find words. I ended the call. There was no point in listening to her stumble through some excuse. My phone went back into my pocket as I made my way toward them. Each step felt deliberate, a slow build toward something I knew would change everything. Meg shifted uncomfortably as I approached, sliding off the man's lap. He gave me a once-over, clearly not impressed, and stood up as if to assert some kind of dominance. I could tell he didn't take me seriously. Hey man, the guy said, his tone cocky. What's your problem? You got the wrong idea. I stopped just a few feet away from them, calm but ice-cold. Without saying a word, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out two things: the folded marriage certificate and my wedding ring. I tossed them toward Meg with a quiet finality. The papers fluttered in the air before landing in her hands, the ring bouncing off her palm and onto the floor. You might want to keep these, I said calmly, for the memories. Meg stood frozen, her eyes wide, struggling to process what was happening. I could see it, the realization hitting her that everything was unraveling faster than she could control. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. The man stepped forward, still trying to play tough. You need to calm down, buddy. His voice dripped with arrogance. I didn't flinch. Instead, I adjusted my grip on the golf club, holding it casually at my side. I gave him a small, deliberate smile. Here's the thing, I said quietly. I'm not your buddy, and you're going to step back right now. He hesitated, shifting his weight, but he saw in my eyes that I wasn't someone to mess with. After a tense second, he took a step back, raising his hands in mock surrender. All right, no need to make a scene, he muttered, his bravado crumbling. Meg, still standing there, looked between us, her face pale and confused. She reached out toward me, her hand trembling. Jim, please, let's talk about this, she whispered. I took a step back, holding up the golf club between us like a barrier. Talk, I said, my voice low but steady. No, Meg, we're done talking. You can explain yourself to a lawyer. Her face fell. I could see the panic growing, her mind racing for a way out, but there was none. The weight of everything she had just thrown away settled between us like a wall that couldn't be scaled. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice calm and measured. You think you can lie to me, betray me, and just walk away? I gave a small shake of my head. That's not how this ends. The man shifted awkwardly, looking more uncomfortable by the second. "Look, man, no need to drag this out." I shot him a glance that silenced him instantly. He wasn't worth my energy. Meg stood there, helpless, clutching the marriage certificate in one hand, the ring still lying on the floor between us. I stared at her for a moment longer, letting her feel the full weight of her actions. She thought she could get away with this. She thought I'd just roll over and accept it. She was wrong. Without another word, I turned on my heel and walked out of the hotel lobby. Every step away from her felt like shedding the weight of 20 years. As I pushed through the revolving door and stepped into the cool air outside, a strange calm settled over me. But I wasn't done. This was just the beginning. The moment I got back to my truck, I pulled out my phone and started making calls. The lawyer, the bank, the locksmith, every piece of our shared life, our home, our accounts, everything she thought she controlled, was about to be taken from her. Meg had made her choice, and now it was my turn. She would learn just how cruel consequences could be. And when I was done, she wouldn't have anything left. I sat in my car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel as the weight of what had just happened began to settle. Through the rearview mirror, I could still see the hotel entrance. I imagined Meg, probably still standing there, clutching the marriage certificate and realizing just how badly she had underestimated me. 20 years of trust shattered, all for some cheap thrill in a hotel lobby. But this was far from over. This was only the beginning. I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone. There was no time to waste. The first call I made was to my lawyer, Peter, a sharp guy and an old friend. If anyone could untangle a marriage and leave one party with nothing, it was him. "Jim," Peter answered after the second ring. "What's up? You sound tense." "I need you to get the divorce papers ready," I said, my voice steady but cold. "I caught Meg cheating. It's over." There was a pause on the other end. "Jim, I'm sorry, man." "No need for that," I replied curtly. "I need the papers filed immediately. And freeze all our joint accounts. I don't want her touching a cent." Peter's tone shifted into professional mode. "I'll get right on it. Anything else?" "Yeah," I added. "Get me exclusive rights to the house. I'm changing the locks tonight." "Got it," he replied without hesitation. "I'll have the paperwork in your inbox within the hour." I ended the call, my knuckles whitening as I gripped the phone tighter. One step down. Now, time to cut Meg off from everything she thought she could rely on. The next call was to the bank. I knew Meg liked to think she was in control of our finances, but I'd always handled the important stuff. With a few simple instructions, I ensured that every joint account was frozen. She wouldn't get a penny more than she deserved, if that. I allowed myself a brief smile. I could already imagine the look on her face when she tried to pay for something and found her cards declined. She'd think it was some kind of glitch, maybe even call the bank to complain. But it wasn't a glitch. It was part of the plan. After the bank, I called the locksmith. Ralph, an older guy I knew from a couple of renovation projects, picked up. "Hey, Jim, what can I do for you?" "I need new locks on the house," I said. "Tonight." Ralph didn't ask any questions. "No problem. I'll send someone over in a couple of hours." "Perfect," I replied. "And make sure it's done by the time I get back." I hung up and leaned back in the car seat, exhaling slowly. Everything was falling into place. But I wasn't finished. I made one more call, this one to a moving company. I gave them precise instructions. Pack up everything that belonged to Meg and have it delivered to her mother's house by morning. If she wanted to be with someone else, she could do it without any of the comforts of the life we'd built together. With all the calls made, I finally turned the ignition and started driving. The cool evening breeze drifted through the open windows, and for the first time in months, I felt calm, focused. Meg thought she could cheat on me and walk away unscathed. She had no idea what was coming. When I pulled into the driveway of our home, the locksmith's van was already there. A younger guy stepped out with a toolbox, ready to get to work. "You Jim?" he asked, wiping his hands on his jeans. "That's me," I replied. "Change every lock. No exceptions." He nodded, and within 30 minutes, every lock on the house was replaced. He handed me a set of new keys, and I tucked them into my pocket. "Thanks," I said, and the locksmith drove off, leaving me standing on the porch of what was now my house, and my house alone. I took a deep breath, looking out at the quiet street. Everything I'd done today had been just the start. Meg thought she had the upper hand, but she was about to learn just how wrong she'd been. The night was young, and I had a lot more planned. After the locksmith left and the new keys jingled in my pocket, I stood in the center of the living room, feeling the silence settle over me like a thick blanket. The house was eerily quiet, almost as if it knew that things had changed for good. This wasn't our home anymore. It was now just a shell of what we had built, and I wasn't about to leave anything of hers behind. I grabbed a set of moving boxes from the garage and set to work. One by one, I went room to room, clearing out anything that belonged to Meg. It wasn't just about making space, it was about making a statement. I didn't want any trace of her here when she finally realized what was happening. Starting in the bedroom, I yanked dresses off hangers, not caring if they wrinkled as I stuffed them into suitcases. Next came her shoes. Rows of high heels and boots that she had insisted were investments. I tossed them into the bags without a second thought. Her jewelry box was next. I hesitated for just a moment as I opened the lid, revealing the necklaces, bracelets, and rings I had given her over the years. Each piece had once held meaning, but now they were just reminders of a woman I no longer recognized. Without a second thought, I dumped the entire box into one of the bags. Moving to the bathroom, I cleared the vanity of her expensive beauty products. Those fancy moisturizers, serums, and perfumes she couldn't live without. One by one, they clattered into a bin. The sound was oddly satisfying, as if I was slowly erasing every part of her presence. Once the bedroom and bathroom were cleared, I made my way to the living room. The books she loved, the throw blankets she had picked out, even the decorative candles, everything went into boxes. If she wanted it, she could pick it up from her mother's house. I wasn't about to make it easy for her to slip back into my life. It took hours, but by the time I was done, the house felt different. The space that had once been filled with memories, both good and bad, now felt strangely empty. And that was exactly how I wanted it. I stood at the doorway to the bedroom, taking one last look at the room that had once been ours. The bed looked the same, but everything else had changed. This wasn't a place of comfort anymore. It was just a reminder of broken promises. I wiped the sweat from my brow, grabbed my phone, and checked it. No missed calls. No texts. Meg hadn't reached out yet. That told me she was still in the dark. She hadn't tried to use her card or come home to find the locks changed. But she would soon. And when she did, I wanted the message to be loud and clear. There's no coming back. This is the end. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, grabbed the for sale sign I had stashed in the trunk of my car, and walked out to the front yard. Selling the house wasn't just a practical move. It was symbolic. This place, which once represented everything we had built together, was now just another asset to offload. I hammered the sign into the front lawn, each strike into the dirt feeling like another nail in the coffin of our marriage. When it was finally secure, I stepped back and crossed my arms, letting the moment sink in. Felt good. No, it felt right. And just as I expected, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw Meg's name on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering, keeping my tone steady. "Hello, Meg." There was a long pause on the other end, and then her voice came through, tense and confused. "Jim, what the hell is going on? I tried to pay for dinner, and my card got declined. And, did you change the locks?" I leaned against the porch railing, letting the cool evening breeze wash over me. "Yeah," I said casually. "I did." "You can't do this," she snapped, her voice sharp with frustration. "This is our house." "It was our house," I replied coldly. "Not anymore." She exhaled sharply, trying to control her temper. "Jim, we need to talk about this. You're overreacting. Freezing the accounts? Changing the locks? This isn't necessary. We can work through this." I chuckled softly. She still thought she could talk her way out of this, as if things hadn't already spiraled beyond repair. "Work through this," I repeated, my voice hardening. "You were sitting on some guy's lap in a hotel lobby, Meg. There's nothing left to work through." There was silence on the other end, and I knew she was scrambling for a way out. But there wasn't one. "Jim, please," she whispered. "It was a mistake." I wasn't thinking straight. No, Meg, I said firmly. It wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. And now I've made mine. She tried to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. Your things will be at your mom's place by morning. The house is on the market. The accounts are frozen. We're done. And with that, I ended the call. For a moment, I stood on the porch, phone still in hand, letting the quiet settle over me. There was no more anger, no more doubt. Just the cold certainty that this chapter of my life was over. Tomorrow, the movers would come, and Meg would finally see the full extent of what she had lost. There was no coming back from this. This was just the beginning. With everything packed and the house eerily quiet, I sat on the edge of the bed, phone still in hand, thinking about what came next. There was no turning back now. The accounts were frozen, the locks were changed, and the for sale sign in the front yard was a final statement. I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, clarity, and maybe just a hint of sadness. Not sadness for losing Meg, but for the years I had invested in a life that wasn't what I thought it was. But that sadness didn't stay long. It was quickly replaced by the sharp satisfaction of knowing that every loose end was being tied up. There was still more to do. The movers would arrive in the morning to haul everything of hers to her mother's house. I had arranged everything with military precision, nothing left to chance. Meg loved to think she was always 2 steps ahead. But this time, she wouldn't see what hit her. I sat back for a moment, exhaling slowly. The hard part, confronting the truth, was behind me. Now it was just about following through with the plan. I glanced at the phone again, scrolling through my notes and emails. The lawyer had already confirmed the divorce filing, and everything was moving quickly. The house listing was scheduled to go live next week, and I was in touch with a realtor to get it sold fast. Meg would be left with nothing. No house, no shared savings, no comfort zone to crawl back to. And the beauty of it was, she had no idea what was coming next. I stood up and made my way to the front porch, feeling the cool night air against my skin. The for sale sign stood proudly in the yard, illuminated by the streetlights. It was a small thing, but it meant everything. It was a promise to myself. I wasn't just ending a marriage. I was reclaiming my life. Tomorrow, the movers would come, and by the time Meg realized the full extent of what had happened, it would be far too late to undo any of it. I could already imagine the look on her face when she walked up to the house and found herself locked out, or when she checked her accounts only to see everything frozen. It would be the first of many lessons she'd learn the hard way. And as I stood there, letting the satisfaction of it all wash over me, I knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. With the movers gone and the house finally cleared of Meg's things, I stood on the porch, watching the street in front of me. The for sale sign swayed slightly in the breeze, a fitting symbol of everything that was now behind me. I knew the next few hours would be a turning point. Meg would soon discover that her safety net had vanished. And that moment couldn't come soon enough. But something nagged at me. Where had Meg spent the night? I had pieced together the situation. After catching her at the hotel, I stormed out, leaving her stunned and frozen in that lobby. She must have stayed there for the night. I pictured her nervously messaging her lover, expecting him to come to the rescue. But men like that, they don't rescue anyone. She probably begged the hotel staff for a room, thinking she could sort things out the next morning. Meg was always good at getting what she wanted, always smooth-talking her way out of trouble. But this time, she was about to realize just how little control she had left. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me from my thoughts. I pulled it out to see a string of frantic texts from Meg's mom. Meg's mom. Jim, why are Meg's things on the lawn? What's going on? Meg's mom. Please, call me. I'm worried about her. I let the phone slip back into my pocket. I didn't need to explain myself to her mother. She would figure it out soon enough when Meg called, confused and desperate to understand why her life was falling apart. It didn't take long. Around 1 p.m., my phone rang. I didn't have to look at the screen. I knew it was Meg. I let it ring a couple of times before answering, keeping my voice calm and collected. Hello, Meg. Her voice came through the line, shaky and frantic. Jim, what the hell is going on? My mom just called me. She says all my things are on her lawn. Why would you do this? What's happening? I leaned against the porch railing, glancing at the empty driveway. Because they don't belong here anymore, I said evenly. I thought it would be easier for you to pick them up there. You kicked me out, she stammered, disbelief dripping from every word. I smirked to myself. Yeah, I did. There was a pause, as if she was trying to make sense of what I had just said. You can't do this, Jim. This is our house. You can't just lock me out. It was our house, I corrected her, my voice calm. Not anymore. Her tone shifted from shock to anger. Where am I supposed to go? Where am I supposed to stay? Sounds like a question for your new boyfriend, I said coldly. She was silent for a moment, stunned by my bluntness. I could hear her breathing quicken, the wheels in her mind spinning as she realized the gravity of the situation. You froze the accounts, didn't you? She whispered, more to herself than to me. That's right, I replied. The accounts are frozen, the locks are changed, and the house is on the market. We're done, Meg. Her voice cracked as she tried to regain control of the conversation. Jim, please. I was confused. It was a mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly. No, Meg. It wasn't a mistake, I said, my voice firm. It was a choice. And now you're dealing with the consequences. Where am I supposed to go? She repeated, her voice sounding smaller, more desperate. I shrugged, even though she couldn't see it. That's not my problem. You can't do this, she whispered, the desperation growing in her voice. Oh, I already did, I said, my voice final. Your things are at your mom's place. You can start over there or wherever you want. But it won't be here. I ended the call without giving her the chance to say anything else. For a moment, I just stood there on the porch, phone still in hand, letting the silence sink in. The movers were gone, her things were out of my life, and Meg was finally learning what it felt like to have no control. I could imagine her now, standing in some hotel room, staring at her phone, trying to figure out what to do next. Her lover was probably nowhere to be found. Men like him never stick around when things get complicated. And now, with no money, no house, and nowhere to go, she had no choice but to face the reality she had created. The thought brought a strange sense of peace. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was free. By the time the sun started to dip toward the horizon, I knew Meg was beginning to feel the full weight of what she had lost. The house, the accounts, the stability, everything she thought she could take for granted was gone. She had made her bed with someone else, and now she would have to lie in it, whether that meant crashing on her mom's couch or scrounging for a hotel room until she figured out her next move. I glanced at my phone one more time, half expecting another flood of texts from her. But there was only silence. That told me everything I needed to know. She was out of options and probably too humiliated to keep trying. As the last light of the day faded and the neighborhood began to settle down, I allowed myself to relax for the first time in what felt like months. There was no more second-guessing, no more hoping for change. Meg had made her choice, and now I had made mine. Tomorrow, I'd meet with the realtor and finalize the sale of the house. Soon, even the walls that had witnessed our past would belong to someone else. The last ties to a life I thought I wanted would be severed, and I could finally move on. This was a new chapter, one where I wasn't playing by anyone's rules but my own. I poured myself a drink, sat back on the porch, and watched the world carry on as if nothing had happened. And, in a way, nothing had, at least not for the rest of the world. But for me, everything was finally falling into place. The next morning, I was up early again, ready to wrap up the last few pieces of this new life I was building. With Meg out of the picture and her things safely dumped at her mom's place, it was time to meet with the realtor and officially list the house. I wanted it sold quickly. This wasn't just about moving on. It was about wiping the slate clean and making sure there was nothing left for Meg to cling to. At 9 a.m. sharp, the realtor arrived. She was a young, ambitious woman who came highly recommended. As she stepped inside, she gave me a quick smile and immediately got to work inspecting the house. "You've got a great property here," she said, taking notes. "This will move fast, especially in this market." "That's what I'm counting on," I replied. "Price it to sell. I'm not interested in holding on to it." She gave me a knowing nod, clearly used to people wanting to unload homes quickly after a messy breakup. By the time we finished the paperwork, The house was officially on the market. It felt like a final nail in the coffin, a fitting end to the life Meg and I had built together. As the realtor left, I stood in the empty living room for a moment, taking it all in. The house felt different now, like it was no longer tied to me or the memories it once held. It was just a building, waiting for someone else to fill it with their own stories. I stepped outside, locking the door behind me, and gave the for sale sign a satisfied glance. Soon, this place would be someone else's responsibility. I was already thinking about where I wanted to go next. Maybe a smaller place. Something new, without ghosts from the past lurking in every corner. Just as I was about to leave, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Meg, again. I debated ignoring it, but something told me this call would be different. I answered, keeping my voice steady. "Hello, Meg." Her voice on the other end was flat. No more anger, no more pleading. Just exhaustion. "You really did it, didn't you?" "Yeah," I replied. "I did." There was a long pause, and then she let out a bitter laugh. "I can't believe it. You froze the accounts, changed the locks, threw me out, and now you're selling the house." "That's right," I said simply. "We're done, Meg. I told you that." "You didn't even give me a chance," she said quietly, as if she still couldn't believe it. "No," I corrected her. "You had 20 years of chances. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it." She was silent again, and I could almost hear her weighing her options, trying to figure out what to do next. But there was nothing left to say. The life she thought she could fall back on was gone, and I wasn't offering any lifelines. "You're really not coming back, are you?" she whispered. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not." With that, I ended the call. There was no point dragging it out. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and took one last look at the house. It felt good, like the final chapter of a story that needed to end. I climbed into my car, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway without a second thought. The road stretched out ahead of me, full of possibilities. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly free. Meg had made her choice, and now I was making mine. Whatever came next, it was mine to decide. The house sold faster than I could have imagined. Within a week, the realtor called with an offer, cash, no contingencies, and they wanted to close within days. It was exactly what I was hoping for. As I signed the final papers, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The house was officially someone else's problem now. Meg had no idea it would happen so quickly. I could imagine her, still trying to process everything. Her belongings scattered at her mom's, no money, no access to the home she thought was hers. The realization that everything was slipping away must have hit her like a tidal wave. But this was the end of her safety net. The place where we built 2 decades of memories was gone, erased from her life as if it had never existed. When the day of closing arrived, I met the buyers briefly at the lawyer's office. A young couple, glowing with excitement, talked eagerly about all the plans they had for the place. I smiled, genuinely happy for them. They had no idea about the baggage tied to that house, and that was the best part. It would be a fresh start for them, just as selling it was a fresh start for me. I handed over the keys and signed the last document, watching as the lawyer stamped the paperwork. "Congratulations," the lawyer said with a polite nod. "The sale is official." I stood for a moment, absorbing those words. The sale is official. It was done. The house and everything it represented was no longer mine. That night, I stood outside one last time, just to see the house from a distance. It looked so ordinary, yet knowing it was no longer part of my life felt like shedding an old skin. I leaned against my car, taking in the sight of the sold sticker plastered across the for sale sign. It wasn't just a house I was leaving behind. It was a version of myself that no longer existed. As I got into the car and drove away, I didn't feel sad. In fact, I felt free. Truly free for the first time in years. No more doubts, no more burdens, no more pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Over the next few days, Meg tried to contact me again. Her texts were erratic, some filled with rage, others with apologies. "Meg, I can't believe you sold the house. We could have worked through this. Meg, you didn't even fight for us. How could you do this to me? Meg, Jim, please, I made a mistake. Let's talk." But I didn't respond. There was no point. What was left to say? Every time she reached out, it only confirmed that she was scrambling, trying to find a way to reel me back in. But I wasn't playing her game anymore. Eventually, the messages stopped. She must have realized that it was over. For good. With the house sold and the paperwork behind me, I packed up a few of my essentials and hit the road. I hadn't planned my next steps exactly. I just knew I needed to leave for a while, clear my head, and figure out what life looked like without Meg in it. I drove for hours, taking scenic back roads, enjoying the quiet hum of the engine and the open sky stretching ahead. For the first time, the future felt like a blank canvas, not a weight I had to carry. There was no one I needed to answer to, no past holding me back. I booked a room at a small lakeside cabin, a place far enough from everything to give me the space I needed. As I sat on the porch that evening, watching the sun dip below the water, I allowed myself to reflect, not with regret, but with acceptance. Meg had been a huge part of my life, but that chapter was over and I was okay with that. People change, situations change, and holding on to something just because of the time invested only drags you down. I had no idea what came next, but for once that didn't scare me. In fact, it excited me. I was free to do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. A week later, as I sat by the lake with a cup of coffee in hand, my phone buzzed. It wasn't Meg this time. It was my lawyer, Peter. "Hey Jim, just wanted to let you know everything is squared away. Divorce is finalized, accounts are untangled, and Meg officially has no claim to anything. You're free, man." I smiled, more to myself than to Peter. "Thanks, Pete. I appreciate everything." After ending the call, I leaned back in my chair, taking in the peaceful view. The sun shimmered across the surface of the water, casting a warm glow over everything. It was over. Really, truly over. There was no anger left in me, no resentment, just peace. I wasn't carrying the weight of a broken marriage anymore. I had let it go, just like I had let go of the house, the memories, and everything else that no longer served me. And it felt damn good. As I sat there, watching the gentle ripples on the lake, I realized something. Life didn't have to be complicated. It was as simple as knowing when to hold on and when to let go. Meg had made her choices, and now I had made mine. This was the start of something new. Whatever came next, it would be on my terms, and that was all that mattered. So that's the end of my story. 20 years of marriage. Gone in an instant because of a choice Meg made. It was messy, sure, but at least now I have closure. The house is sold, the divorce is final, and Meg? Well, I assume she's still piecing together what little is left of the life she thought she could control. Looking back, I feel like I did everything I needed to do. I took swift action, cut ties, and made sure she couldn't weasel her way back into my life. But was it the right way to handle things? I mean, I know I did what felt right for me, but sometimes I wonder, should I have handled it differently? Could there have been another way to end things without all the drama? And that's where I want to hear from you, the viewers of Reddit Confessions. If you were in my shoes, how would you have handled it? Would you have taken the same steps? Would you have confronted Meg differently or maybe tried to work things out? Or do you think I was too harsh by selling the house and leaving her with nothing? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know, would you have sold the house or kept it? Was I right to cut off access to the accounts? Or would you have handled the finances differently? What would your revenge look like? Or would you have taken the high road and just walked away? This story is mine, but I know a lot of people have dealt with betrayal in their own lives. Maybe my approach will resonate with some of you, or maybe you'd have done something completely different. Either way, I want to know what you think. So hit the comments. Let me know how you'd have played this one out. Was this the right kind of justice, or did I go too far? Thanks for sticking with me through this journey. I'll be reading your comments closely, and who knows, maybe some of your insights will help me as I move forward. After all, starting over isn't easy, but it's a hell of a lot better than living a lie. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. See you in the comments.